If they hold these two back another year, I am putting in for early retirement.
Oh boy, we get to talk about this one. If you don't know, Fanboy and Chum Chum has a certain reputation as not just one of the worst Nicktoons, but probably the worst Nicktoon. Actually, not just that, but it's probably considered one of the worst cartoons of all time. During the late 2000s and the early 2010s, Nickelodeon was in a pretty rough spot, as you've probably noticed by now. And Fanboy and Chum Chum was often cited as them jumping the shark. Not helping was the fact that Nickelodeon did refuse Adventure Time before taking on Fanboy and Chum Chum, which, in hindsight, is one of the stupidest corporate decisions in history. For those who were born yesterday, Cartoon Network got Adventure Time, which not only turned out to be one of their most popular cartoon shows of all time, but it sort of started a really good age at the network, with shows like Regular Show, Steven Universe, and The Amazing World of Gumball following along. Meanwhile, in Fanboy and Chum Chum's wake, Nickelodeon started getting shows like Robot and Monster, Planet Sheen, Sanjay and Craig, and The Breadwinners, which, we're gonna get to all of these, but let's just say that they're not good. Back when I started reviewing, this show was hated. Actually, it wasn't just hated, let's say. Every so often there's a piece of media that attracts such a hate-dom that it's really astounding. It's something to behold. You think the hatred of Teen Titans Go was bad? Nobody would dare stick up for Fanboy and Chum Chum. At least anybody who wanted to have a reputation, and at least at the time. It's now a decade old, and time can do interesting things to perspective. I mean, considering the show's premiere was literally immediately after Truth or Square, it was probably not off to a good start to begin with. But let's get some facts out of the way. This was a popular show. It had a full 52-episode run that lasted 3 years, which is about standard for a show. It also won 5 Emmy Awards, which is tied with only El Tigre as the most Emmy Awards of any Nicktoon. Not that Emmys really mean anything. And while Nickelodeon had a lot of faith in this show initially, when the hate got too powerful, they did unceremoniously bury it. Not just throwing it to the sister Nicktoons network, but even once it's there, it started airing it at 4:30 in the morning. On top of that, Nickelodeon held episodes for over a year, for good measure. It's clear at some point that the higher-ups realized that they had indeed fucked up. Then again, with how many good shows that Nickelodeon fucked over, I'm not entirely sure what to think. Let's just have a moment of silence for all the other network shenanigans we dealt with for over the years. This list is, growing. Seriously, Nickelodeon, at 18, as a society, we kind of expect you to have your shit together. But 18 years after the first Nicktoon, you're still doing this and you're fucking up worse than ever. So for a while now on Nick-O-Rama, I have been giving some controversial opinions, and I have to unfortunately give another controversial opinion here. The hate was overblown for this show. Actually, I think that's getting to be the standard opinion of Fanboy and Chum Chum, that the hate was overblown. I'm not saying that the show is good or anything, but let me put it this way. Of the original Nickelodeon marathon I did in 2014, the Fanboy and Chum Chum episode was the least bad out of all of them. In hindsight, I really think I should have taken a look at Planet Sheen instead at the time, because that episode was far worse than the Fanboy and Chum Chum episode I looked at. Let's take a look at the main complaint first. This show is annoying. It is very annoying. I don't think that it's the most annoying show that I've ever seen. Honestly, The Mighty Bee was worse in that regard. The problem with Fanboy and Chum Chum is that it's constant noise. There is never a moment of silence. It never takes a breath. Every single second either has someone talking or making a sound effect, or the background music jumps in volume to make sure that each episode is 11 minutes of non-stop noise. Not only that, but it's loud noise too. The theme song, which I declared one of the worst of all time, is a pretty good example of the noise that you'll be dealing with throughout the entire show. Luckily, though, for the actual main show, Fanboy and Chum Chum don't sing. At least in none of the episodes that I watched for this review. Because, thank God. And that is because I will have to say that the voice acting for the show is not good. I mean, it's hard to tell because our main characters are shouting all the time, but that's an issue with scripting and direction. Chum Chum, for instance, has the exact same voice as Dogen from Psychonauts. And now that I can't unnotice it, you can't either. And to hammer it home, it also has the same voice actress as Luna Loud, and you can tell if you do listen to it. Another big issue is our main characters, especially their names, Fanboy and Chum Chum. Even in 2009, it's clear that a fanboy wasn't a cool thing to be. Actually, I don't know if that's exactly the problem here. Being a fanboy was pretty lame at the time, but calling someone a fanboy was probably considered just as lame, or even more lame. So whether or not they wanted us to like or dislike this character, that was probably a poor move to choose the name Fanboy. And Chum Chum is just stupid. And I mean, you've probably heard the profanity that it's changed to often. Actually, the concept of the show is non-existent. Fanboy and Chum Chum is about two kids who dress up like superheroes. They even have stupid hero names. The issue? While superheroes are referenced in the show, Fanboy and Chum Chum don't actually do anything resembling heroes. They don't even do the Teen Titans Go or Freakazoid thing of trying to be superheroes and making life hell for those around them. I mean, they do make hell for those around them, but dressing up like superheroes and having the whole motif is just wasted. They have quirky people in their life, like Kyle, who is a wizard for no reason. They have an obsession with these slushy ripoffs, but honestly, it feels like they're just pieces of the concept, not an actual show. The whole thing here feels very half-baked. There's not much logic as to why any of these pieces are here and how they really go together. And that falls into the storytelling as well. Well, I say storytelling like it means anything here. I mean, what happens in each episode you could call a story. It wouldn't get you to pass kindergarten, but at least on a technicality you could call it a story. They do tell you things. Every single episode of the show is basically a random events plot. Things happen, and then other things happen. They may or may not be related to what had just happened. There isn't any sort of logic for the world that they live in either. Now, there are shows that can do this and pull it off quite well, but Fanboy and Chum Chum is not one of them. And I think that's because it focuses on characters who are just as weird as the world around them. What's more fun, a character who just goes with the flow, or a character who constantly tries to fight the world that they found themselves in? Remember, you can't have a story about Wonderland without Alice. This is probably why the extras in the show are so much more interesting. If there's something you like about the show, it's probably them. It can get into annoying territory for sure, with characters like Kyle or Lenny constantly getting misfortune thrust upon them, but they have a kind of charisma. And at the very least, Kyle shows some active resistance. There's a fight, a bit of back and forth, which is a step further than shows like The Mighty Bee or Cat Dog. I also like that there's Boog. He's a big stupid brute that beats up Fanboy and Chum Chum, or at least threatens to. And honestly, I just realized how refreshing that it is that there is some character or obstacle that the super annoying main characters of the shows is actively afraid of. On top of that, it does mean that they do face consequences for what they do, at least in some sort of cosmic sense. And I think that's one of the main reasons I think the show is better than The Mighty Bee. Fanboy and Chum Chum don't always manage to raise hell with impunity. Sometimes they do, but more often than usual, they do suffer the consequences for their terror. Or they throw consequences towards things that actually do deserve it, like a vampire. And honestly, I'm not too angry at the random events plots, because it's clear that this is their only way to be creative. The basic plots, if you really think about them, are kind of overdone. Making someone think that they're sick for your own benefit, that's a pretty common plot. Thinking that there's a monster when there really is none, that's another bit of overdone. And of course, cartoon characters getting sent back to kindergarten, which is a very strange plot to be really overdone now that I think about it. It's clear that any ambition was sent to the animation department. It's hard to know if Fanboy and Chum Chum has good animation. After all, it's CGI, and that any CGI that's 10 years old is probably not going to look as good as it can. But it is one of the few CGI cartoons in general that isn't based solely on a movie or video game or whatever, so they needed to build the designs from the ground up, and I will say, it's nice to see some stylization. I kind of like the overall character designs. It does really understand the basic principles of animation, and to tell you the truth, I like how energized it is. The kind of gags in the show are often fourth wall breaks, and they do take advantage of the medium in ways that many cartoons don't. It's something that we really haven't seen since the 90s, and I do like the bright colors that the show has. There also does seem to be a blend of 2D and 3D animation, with some of the backgrounds often just being two-dimensional drawings, which is a clever way to save money and still look relatively decent. I mean, sometimes it does look like cardboard cutouts in an elementary school play, but usually it's hard to notice. I do wish they threw in some more details here and there. There are too many barren school walls in this show. Fanboy and Chum Chum is basically the animation equivalent of candy, brightly colored and full of wild energy. It's certainly not good for you, and there are better things out there for you, for sure. But some people like candy, and shows like this do allow you to turn your brain off for half an hour. There are also far worse things out there for you. Am I giving the show a recommendation? Hell no. I'm just not saying that it's the worst thing ever out there. With everything that I've experienced this Nick-O-Rama, and still having some of the worst shows to go through, I have to say that the hate towards this one has been overblown. Honestly, while I'm probably never going to watch this show again, I would not put it on a top 10 worst Nicktoons list. And I do stand by it not being on my top 10 worst cartoons of the 2000s list. At the very least, you could say that this one is unique and original, unlike, say, Coconut Fred.
Don't go away. Coming up next on Nickelodeon.
What you gonna do?
Change your name to Larry.
Rub bacon on the queen.
And all the perfect sense on Planet Shit.